Okay, hello, I'm Alexis Duran, expert in the supernatural, hired by Ivan for various tasks. And in this case, it's to inform you about the supernatural. This time, I get to pick the topic, and I'm going with something I like to call the sentiency of steel, or living swords if you like. Personally, I like the first one because I like alliteration. But here's a little lesson today, hey? So, I'm sure you've all heard some sort of story, legend that there's a sword out there, used in battles, used by killers, so much it started to soak the blood of its victims. So much so that it started to get a taste for the victims, their blood, the scream, the pain, and ultimately their death. Some might even say they collected their souls, but let's not get into that. Some would also say the sword would pass hands, one hand to another, another warrior, another killer, and each person that grabbed that sword would suddenly be compelled, as there was a little voice tapping inside their head telling them to kill, to draw blood for it. Yeah, that shit happens. Well, it's more complicated than that, but let's go into it. It's a sort of odd phenomena that does happen. It's probably better known in Japan because there is a folklore called Tsukugami. Okay, I'm not good with Japanese, so I'm not gonna even try to say the Japanese word. Let's just say item spirit. In Japanese folklore, there is the item spirit that when an item cared for well enough after 100 years on its 100th birthday it will gain a sort of soul, become a sort of tiny god, have its own life and move around and do its own stuff. The concepts are similar, so it's probably not a surprise that this idea of the living sword pops up more in Japan than it does in the West. But it does still pop up, so it's kind of a wider phenomenon. Even among supernatural circles, this is kind of a folklore itself. It's like, is it real? It's like, so that's why I find it kind of interesting. The idea is that an item, especially a sword, a weapon of sorts, that is imbued with a special force. Not naturally, not even supernaturally. It's just something that sort of happens. Sorry, I burped there. I just had lunch. This item is usually a sword. Let's keep going with the sword metaphor here. The sword often gets a taste of blood for, obvious reasons. It's a weapon. It's often used to hurt people. And in doing so, they get blood on them. A lot of people suggest that the blood itself, having generally attributes related to life, it's a metaphorical there, but you get it. It gets onto weapons, especially ones with some iron on them, because people, I honestly have never figured out what's the deal with iron and magic. I'm not a chemist. I think we need a chemist for that. Anyway, it draws out that life force, imbuing the weapon. And yeah, sometimes it does seem to get a sort of sentiency. And the problem is, you spend your whole life pretty much killing, you might get a taste for it. That bloodlust. I can't even say the word. Lust is infused into the weapon itself through all the bloodshedding, and that force, that new life that's in the weapon, kind of starts influencing the users, the people who get them, which obviously is not good. But it's not necessarily that way. I've heard of weapons who've developed this sort of memory, sentiency themselves, but they're not evil. I know there was like a lance somewhere. Was it a halberd? It's a story I've heard that in Japan, some warrior, skilled user of this lance, used it for years, fighting off enemies, fighting off supernatural forces. In the end, they pierced the side of a mighty monster demon thing, and they used it to trap them. And that was all well and good until the monster got out. But somebody picked up the spear, lance, whatever, and felt a calling towards it. Something different about it. Something infusing them. Something almost possessing them. Something that empowered them, gave them greater strength, that let them use that spear to fight off the escaping monster. It gave it skills, it gave it a hint of knowledge, influencing it. Well, it wasn't evil. Its last act on before it got trapped with the demon was to stop it. It would influence the user to fight for good. And in fact, I have heard of some other swords, mostly in London and England, that were once wielded by knights. And those users were compelled to do good, to fight for honor, and all that stuff. I think when it comes down to it, it really relates to how the sword was used, how the weapon was used to influence them. So I think it's a pretty interesting thing. It's more not an natural attribute of the item, but kind of how it was used. So that's kind of a human thing, isn't it? If you use the weapon for good, for protection, it might influence it to influence others to protect. But if you get lost in bloodlust, I'm never going to say that word right, you might end up creating a real killer weapon. So, is there any advice I can give you guys for such encounters? Not really, no. The thing is that most people won't even realize they're being influenced unless it's so beyond their own actions, and they are willing to observe themselves as a third party sometimes, like take themselves out of the situation. Oh, so why did I do that? It's really a mentality thing for the person, especially if the person themselves are inclined for violence. They might not notice that they are being influenced to commit more violence. The best you can do is try to steer clear of such weapons. People with some sight, some power may sense it like a dark aura, or, just giving them the willies. So the best you can do for these kinds of weapons is stay clear. Even the most chivalrous, nicest weapons might not be ones you want to hold, because they might imbue you with some more strength, but there are limits to your own body, and the weapon might not know that. You may die doing the right thing, and that's up to you if you should want to do that, but maybe a weapon should influence it. Most of these events of these weapons being imbued with sentiency are rare. It takes the right amount of influences to affect the sword or weapon in such a way. But the problem is that when it does, it can be quite powerful. And some people end up treasuring these weapons. Most of the time, these weapons are used hard and fast and will break down before they even get close to sentiency. But if they do get sentiency, they will gain a bit more endurance to them. And then people will take care of them. That could just give them a longer and longer life. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I really want to do one of these things where I can actually give you some proper advice with dealing with it. But until then, yeah. Send me your questions, comments, and concerns, like, subscribe, and all that. And again, send what you want to hear about in the comments. If you want to hear about haunted houses or whatever, put it down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And with one of those videos. So, yeah. I guess I'm signing off. I gotta go collect my $5 from the guy who's making me do these videos. So, yeah. Thank you. Bye. Comment, like, subscribe.